is really, and I posted this today, folks. America is involved in a I'll call it World War III. It's already started. And no, it isn't the Russians, and no, it isn't the Chinese. Now, they may have some money in the game. I can't speak to that, but I'll give you a hint. What do these cities in the United States have in common? Bowling Green, Kentucky, High Point, North Carolina, St. Cloud, Minnesota, Twin Falls, Idaho, and right here in the heartland, Columbus, Ohio. What do those cities all have in common, folks? They are home to growing populations of Islamic refugees from Iraq, from Syria, from Afghanistan, and especially from Somalia. Now, if you want to understand what America is headed towards, folks, all you need to do is look to Europe. That's a glimpse of our future. Now, some folks think, oh, that's just not possible. That can't happen here in America. Listen, folks, it's already happening. It's underway right now. What's happening in Europe, they're maybe 10, 15 years ahead of us on this progression, but it's happening. It's beginning to happen right now. Listen to me, folks. Listen clearly and hear what I'm saying. Don't let the political zombies in Washington, D.C., and I don't care whether they function under the umbrella of an R, the D, an I, or now the new one, socialist, tell you that there's nothing to see here in this mass immigration if Islamist, because I can tell you something. They're either ignorant of the true goals of those managing this invasion, or they're deliberately lying to us. Either way, folks, they're dangerous. So we need to stop listening to those people. I'm very pleased today to welcome to the show author and freelance journalist Leo Hohmann. Leo, welcome to Dr. Mike Live. Okay, I'm not hearing you, Leo. If you're trying to just to say something, I don't hear anything. But again, Leo's book is Stealth Invasion: Muslim Conquest Through Immigration and Resettlement Jihad. I love that title, folks, because that accurately captures what is happening. Let me read a quote from the book while Leo gets the audio figured out. Here's a quote from the book, and this is toward the introduction uh, on page 14, and it says this: there's been plenty of warning signs that America's Muslim population is getting restless, similar to Europe's. Attacks carried out by Muslims in 2015 and 16 in the United States included the murders of 5 unarmed U.S. servicemen in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I remember that because for a short time after that, for a couple of months after that, we had armed veterans standing at the federal building here, the recruiting station here in Lima, Ohio, and they were going to protect our military recruiters. So in 2015-16, that happened in Tennessee. Again, I remember that. An attack against an office Christmas party in San Bernardino, California, killing 14 people. Do you remember that? Because I do. That was a moderate Muslim couple. That's always the excuse. A knife attack that wounded 4 in a Columbus, Ohio restaurant in my neck of the woods. Another knife attack by a Muslim student at the University of California, Merced, that wounded 5. Then on June 12, 2016, at a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, a Muslim American born of immigrant parents from Afghanistan entered and began methodically mowing down patrons with a semi-automatic rifle and pistol, killed 49, wounded dozens more in the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil since the September 11, 2001 airplane attacks. European Union cataloged a record number of terrorist attacks in 2015 and 16. Leo's book came out in 2017. That's why I'm giving you those years. Attacks on American soil also reached post 9/11 highs. Though the media have duly reported on many of the events I've described, most attacks never get reported in the news, especially if the attacks were against Jewish targets. Anti-Semitic attacks have skyrocketed to post-World War II highs in many of the European countries receiving the most Muslim migrants. It's coming to America, folks. It's coming to America. Leo, are you there with us yet?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Great.
All right. Thank you for joining me, Leo. So I was just reading a quote from your book. Fantastic read, by the way, folks. Stealth Invasion. Leo, what got you interested in investigating this particular subject, immigration and resettlement, and as you describe it, immigration and resettlement jihad? What alerted you, and what got you going down this trail?
Well, I was already covering immigration in general. It was the summer of 2015. And as you recall back then, Mike, we had the Central American migrants massing at the southern border.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, the children, we were told, were, needing help, and a lot of churches were taking them in. A lot of churches in California, Texas, Arizona, and all the way into the interior of the United States were getting involved in that. And it just sort of grew out of there from covering illegal immigration and the problems at the border to looking at immigration as a whole. And when I say as a whole, I mean, you know, looking into opening the book on some of our legal immigration programs. Uh, we allow 1.5 million people per year into our country legally, which is really unheard of on a mass scale
Mhm.
from time immemorial. I don't believe any nation on earth has ever had that generous of an immigration program. So it's really interesting that even with 1.5 million per year coming in legally, that the left says that's not enough. We need to open our borders on our southern border and eventually our northern border as well, and just allow people to come and go freely without so much as asking who they are and what background they may have had an affiliation with, what anything about their family, or do they work for a living? Do they have any skills? None of this is important to the left because they have an ulterior agenda. But let's just start with the legal program. I think that is really the focus of my book, Stealth Invasion, because there's been so much written already about the problem with illegal immigration. And so once I started to look into the legal immigration programs, one really jumped out at me. There were several that jumped out at me, actually, but one in particular, and that is the Refugee Resettlement Program. Uh, this is a program that began, for all intents and purposes, in 1980. And it seemed like a really good program at the time because we were bringing in people from Southeast Asia and from the Soviet bloc who were fleeing communism. But over time, it morphed into a completely different animal, and we end up taking a a large portion of people, almost half of the entire number of people coming in under the resettlement program, from Islamic Sharia compliant countries in the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, uh, you name it, in some of the worst, most anti-American hotbeds in the world, like you mentioned, Afghanistan and Somalia, my goodness, Sudan, places like this. And these are people who are not coming to America for the same reasons that your ancestors or mine came to America. And that's part of why the left has been so successful with this program, is because immigration, the word immigration alone is like a sacred cow in our country because everybody, almost everybody here, is a child or a grandchild or a great grandchild of immigrants. My own immigrant history is not that far down the line. On the one side, my grandparents came from Germany in the 1930s, and on the other side, they came from Italy in around 1920. And so we all have an affinity for what? For legal immigration. It's how this country was built, and so we have this idea in our mind of what immigrants look like. And it's the hardworking, up from your bootstraps person who might not have a lot of money, but they want to work hard. They don't want to be on welfare. They want to what? They want to assimilate.
Yes.
That is the one ingredient above all else that is missing from these immigrants, or really they're migrants, because an immigrant has a lot. That's a loaded word. Like I said, in America, when you
Yeah.
use the word immigrant, it's assumed that this person is either oppressed in their home country and coming here for freedom, or they have some skills and they're coming here to make a better life for themselves. Neither one of which is the case when we're talking about countries like Afghanistan or Sudan. These are, in most cases, now there's always going to be, exceptions, but in the vast, vast majority of the cases, these are people who are coming here not because they love America, not because they want to necessarily improve their lot in life, although that might be part of it. They're coming here, Mike, above and beyond all other reasons to change America. And we can get into that if you want in a little bit as to exactly what type of vision they have for America.
Yeah. One of the things, Leo, that I learned reading your book, and I have to admit that it was beyond frustrating. I actually felt my blood pressure going up when
Uh-huh.
I read it. Was this and you mentioned the original intent of the Refugee Act, and no issues with the original intent, but that's not the way that it's applied today. And the organization that is in control of immigration in the United States is, in fact, you ready for this, folks? United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees now hand selects, and I'm quoting Leo here from page 7 of his book, now hand selects about 95% of all international refugees coming to the United States. You heard that correctly. United Nations chooses who comes to live within our borders. Does that help you to understand, folks, why we're seeing this influx, this skewed number of refugees, quote unquote, from Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Burma, and Syria? Let me say all of that even clearer. The United Nations tells President Trump who's coming in our country, and apparently he can or won't do anything about it. Is that a fair statement, Leo?
That is not quite accurate, Mike. That's the way
Please
it
correct me.
that is the way it was working under President Obama and previous presidents to a large extent. Uh, the president uh, can spell out what countries or regions from the world he would like to bring in more or less refugees each year. And President Trump has completely eliminated Syria from the mix. So, but most of those other countries that you named, they are still coming in, although not in nearly as large of numbers as under President Obama or President Bush. Uh, I believe
So
there's
that
a
would
yeah,
that would
but but
explain the
but what
dust
one
up then.
once the president selects the regions and the countries from which we want to bring the refugees, the UN then selects the individual refugees from those countries.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Well, that's troubling on a lot of different levels to me personally, and I think that it should bother any freedom, liberty loving person, whether you're a native born American or naturalized or an immigrant that's become a citizen. That should bother people, Leo.
It really should, not because they're from any particular country, but because of the ideology that they're bringing
Yes.
with them.
Yes.
This is the Islamic ideology, which most people in America would describe as a religion.
Mhm.
And that's why in many cases, I don't know how much your listeners know about Islam, but it's a very dominating ideology. Wherever Islam is present, it seeks to dominate. We know
Yes.
this if we look at history. Um, excuse me. Um, and nothing has changed in that. Uh, you know, if you look at Open Doors list of the most persecuted countries in the world for Christians to live, uh, outside of North Korea, they're almost all Islamic states: Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Somalia. Nigeria is not an Islamic state, but it's about 45, 46% Muslim.
Mhm.
And in the regions where Muslims dominate, you have Boko Haram running wild, kidnapping and killing Christians, burning churches. It's only a matter of time before Nigeria becomes the next Islamic state. And so this is what we see. So why should we think that it would be any different to bring Sharia compliant Muslims to the West? It may take a while longer, uh, but it's not going to be any different. And this is one thing that my book really explores. I talked about legal versus illegal immigration and how I took a different road and focused on legal immigration. Uh,
Mhm.
it's a similar tack that I took on the issue of jihad. There's many types of jihad. There's violent jihad, which we see in the news regularly. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold. But there's also the other side, which is nonviolent or stealth jihad. And this
Yeah.
is where, in a Western democratic country like our own, the Muslim Brotherhood gains a foothold for the Islamic societies in our countries, in our states, and our cities, and they build upon that foothold. How do they do that? That they by the building of mosques and increasing the number of observant Muslims. We have peaceful Muslims in this country, but most of the ones that are what we would call Sharia compliant are the ones who are the most observant Muslims. They attend mosque regularly. They say their prayers 5 times a day. If you're a woman, you wear the hijab. If you're a man, you let your beard grow out and you closely trim your mustache. These are just outward signs of, of a Sharia compliant Muslim. Well, the more that we get these type of Sharia compliant Muslims pumped into a given city or a given county, uh, you start seeing more and more demands being placed on the receiving community. You start seeing demand for halal meals in the schools and jails. You start seeing demands for Islamic prayer rooms in the public
Mhm.
schools.
Mhm.
You start seeing all kinds of other demands in the workplace. Um, clothing, special clothing demands, special food demands, lawsuits being filed. This is called civilization jihad, and that's not my term. That is the term used by the Muslim Brotherhood in a document that was seized by the FBI in 2004. And so we have it in their own writing, this explanatory memorandum, as it was called, found in a subchamber of a basement in Northern Virginia, and presented as evidence in a public trial in Texas in 2007, Mike. And this document spells out exactly how the Muslim Brotherhood had planned as early as late 80s, early 90s to, quote, infiltrate and sabotage our miserable house from within, that they would destroy us from within. And they would use not violent jihad to do it. They would use immigration and stealth jihad, also called civilization jihad. And
Yes,
they do this by infiltrating our institutions, our schools, our churches, our government systems, our law enforcement, our media. Uh, it really is an insidious, creeping serpent.
sounds very much like the same strategy that progressive Marxists use to change a culture in a nation. Jared, I popped a link into the chat. I believe that is a link to the document that Leo was talking about. That the Muslim it was discovered, and this is a strategy document that the Muslim Brotherhood has used. Um, that's Leo's site there. Yeah, that's a good time to so leohoman.com. You go there. That's Leo's site, and you can order the book Stealth Invasion from Leo's site right there. Leo Hohmann. That's HOHMANN.com. That's his site. He posts regularly there. I would encourage you to go there, sign up for the for the newsletter or the periodic emails that you get for a new article. Um, Jared, are you able to grab that link out of the chat and bring? Okay, okay, it's up. Okay, so Leo, there's the document then that. No, I think there's a different one, Jared. Did I give you the wrong one? Oh, I'm sorry. I gave you the wrong one. Let me see if I can grab that real quick. Okay, this is actually a document. I'm sorry, Jared. I gave you the wrong one. Let me see here. Yeah, there it is. Try that one. Okay. This is the document that Leah was talking about, folks, I believe. We'll see just here in a minute. Um, can you see that, Leo?
I can, yes.
Okay. Is that the same document, essentially?
Yes, it
Isn't it?
looks like it is.
Okay.
Uh, I refer to it on page 30 of my book, and you're exactly right, by the way, in picking up the not so subtle similarity to the Marxist strategy of infiltrating from within, that which you cannot defeat with a standing army. What better way to defeat than by infiltrating from within? And that's the big misunderstanding about Islam. Most people, and it's because of what we see in our media, what we hear from our leaders. When we think of Islam, we think of something that's what over there, and it's
Yes.
something that will need to be defeated militarily over there. No, the battlefield for that we face, and it is a cultural, political battlefield, is
Yes.
right here at home.
Yes.
And we have about 5 million and growing Muslims already in this country. We have more than 3,400 mosques, which is like 75% more mosques than we had just since 9/11. The vast majority of mosques in
Wow.
this country have been built since 9/11. Uh, the when we celebrate or commemorate 9/11 every year, you no longer hear any mention about Islam. Uh,
Right.
and so the media, our educational system, they've all done a very good job of smothering up the truth and covering up the truth so that we really don't know who our enemy is. And even if we did know who the enemy is, it's portrayed as something over there on the other side of the world that
Hmm.
will need to be defeated by our military. It's not something we need to be concerned about here at home. And so I think most Americans have a really wrong idea and a wrong assessment
Hmm.
of exactly where we stand in 2019 with regard to Islam. Like you said, all we need to do is look at Europe and we will see our future in the mirror. They're about 15 years ahead of us, maybe 20 at the most. Uh, and they now have been moving what some former former Muslims tell me is the upper house. The upper house is when they feel that they have control over all of the major institutional hierarchies and structures, and they can start becoming more honest about what it is they stand for. They're no longer parading around claiming to be the religion of peace. They can start pushing for some of the more distasteful Islamic laws, like the right to marry more than one wife, the right to beat your wife, and they can also start becoming more violent. And this is the big secret now going on in Europe. It just came out, Mike, last week with the burning of Notre Dame, that this was never reported in the Western media. That for the last 2 or 3 years, there's been thousands of churches burned, desecrated, or otherwise attacked in France alone. It's also going on hot and heavy in Germany. We're not told about these attacks. People, women in Australia, in Austria, excuse me, women in Austria who go out after dark alone are now wearing hijabs, we're being told in some reports, even if they're not Muslim. This is because they feel unsafe to go out uncovered in certain areas of town after dark. And so they're putting on the hijab in order to feel safe. This is our future, folks, if we don't get a handle on this. And so, we already, how do we think Ilhan Omar got elected to Congress?
Right.
This is a bad sign as to just how advanced the Islamization of America has already progressed.
Yes.
If someone like Ilhan Omar can get elected to Congress, Rashida Tlaib can get elected to Congress, that tells you that we already have voting blocks that are large enough, Islamic voting blocks in certain areas of the country that are foaming at the mouth to elect. I'm telling you, literally, Mike, these Muslim Brotherhood types are foaming at the mouth to elect Muslims to Congress. Andre Carson, he is a Muslim member of Congress from Indiana and a Muslim Brotherhood mouthpiece. He bragged a couple of weeks ago when all of this anti-Semitic controversy was going on about the ridiculous anti-Semitism coming from the mouth of Ilhan Omar. He bragged, Mr. Carson, that by 2030 we would have 30 to 35 Muslim members of Congress. That's just 11 years away, and we currently have 3 Muslim members of Congress. He says we will have 30 to 35 in 10 or 11 years. That should send shivers down the spine of every freedom-loving, law-abiding, civil liberties-loving, libertarian, conservative, Democrat, whatever you are.
Yes.
If you want America to be a free country for your posterity, your children, your grandchildren, that should be something that is a profound statement coming from a U.S. congressman.
Amen, Leo. I give a hearty amen to that. It is sheer insanity to see this going on and to remain silent.
Yes, imagine 30 to 35 Ilhan Omars. That's a voting block in Congress that could make the difference between, if nothing else, it could make the difference between whether the United States continues to support the state of Israel.
Yeah, it's bad enough that taxpayers pay the salaries of these folks, but get your mind around this concept. They're going to be appointed to committees that have highly sensitive information, national security level information discussed on a routine basis. And these people who hate America and have publicly said their goal is to bring it down, they're going to be sitting there receiving this information. You better believe they're passing it on to their handlers.
We've already seen that with Ilhan Omar. She is on the Foreign Relations Committee
It's
in the U.S. House. One of the most intensely security-related committees in our government,
mhm.
and she now has a seat at the table.
It's just sheer insanity, and unless Americans, liberty, as Leo said, liberty-minded, freedom-loving, and I don't care if you're libertarian, if you're an R, a D, an I don't care what you are. If you want to maintain what we have, these free, and they're slipping away. If you want to maintain them, we've got to get up and start speaking out and getting in front of people. Listen, sending an email, writing a letter, okay, that's fine. I can tell you something. Those end up in file 13. People don't listen to that anymore. You've got to get out in their faces. You got to go see your representatives. You've got to go to places where these kinds of activities are supported and say, not on my watch. This isn't going to happen. Am I encouraging you to activism? Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm encouraging you to get active, because if you don't, if you continue to sit on your rear end, America is doomed. And you can take that any way you want to, folks, but I'm telling you, unless we do something, listen, all we need to do is look north to Canada to see what happens when people do nothing. They're being systematically dismantled by Mr. Trudeau. And I don't say that with any degree of respect. I know we've got a lot of questions that are coming in now, Leo. We're
Yeah,
at the bottom.
I just wanted to quickly finish that one
Yes,
point I
please
was
do.
kind of trying to make about Ilhan Omar. She did not get elected because there was some organic growth of Muslims in south central Minnesota. Uh, the only reason that Ilhan Omar sits in the Congress today is because of the refugee resettlement program. Uh, the the U.S. State
Yes.
Department, under this program, and in league with 9 NGOs, they call them voluntary organizations, or VOLAGs, who work with the government, have resettled 75,000 Somalis into this area of Minnesota since 1991 or 2.
Wow.
And of course they have large families. So that's the other thing. The other big thing here is the demographic issue. Americans are not having children. The birth rate fell to an all-time low last year among American women. The fertility rate is down to like 1.7 children per woman. Somalis, Sudanese, Afghans, they're having 6, 7, 8 children per woman.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so you can see how
Mhm.
and it's not just Minnesota. There's another big enclave growing in Columbus, Ohio. There's
Yep.
another big enclave in the Seattle, Washington area. Here where I am in Atlanta, we have a growing enclave. Maine, the state of Maine, has a growing Somali enclave. South Dakota, North Dakota, Colorado. It's literally spreading out around the country. And so I believe Mr. Carson is right. I believe we will have 30 to 35 Muslim congressmen in another decade, decade and a half. And
And
so that's how it happens. There's no organic growth of the Muslim religion in America. It's happening through immigration. And immigration was given to us in the Quran by Muhammad himself. He called it the Hijra. And you can learn about that in my book as well.
and what you've just described, Leo, is very deliberate, very intentional, if I may call it this, seeding of a population. They're targeting areas to create an abundance of Muslim immigrants that vote and can automatically guarantee a seat in our Congress. This is
Absolutely.
happening, folks, right under our noses. Right under
Absolutely.
our noses.
There's a
And
group called Jetpack that's based out of the Boston, Massachusetts area that formed a few years ago. And their entire goal is to raise money to fund and train up Muslim politicians. And that's why we saw so many elected in the 2016 cycle, because Jetpack is one of about 2 or 3 organizations nationwide devoted to getting Muslims elected at all levels of government, by the way, not just Congress. We're seeing it even in conservative states like Texas. We're seeing a Muslim mayor in a small city in Texas. So we're seeing it at the city council level, the state level. We saw Dr. Abdul run for governor of Michigan and made a strong showing. He got, I think, 40% of the vote in the primary. Dr. Abdul El Sayed, and so Michigan came very close to having a Muslim governor. And so this is going to be going on at all levels of government. And the problem, Mike, as I see it, is this refugee program is very popular on both sides of the aisle. I cannot sit here today and tell you that I know of a single Republican, let alone a Democrat, who has made this a major issue in a congressional campaign.
Well, and we know the driver behind it, folks. It's the same driver that's behind every program or agenda that sells out the American people. It's the dollar.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I know we've got questions. Let's go to some questions. Kathy, do you have any questions from the social media platforms that you'd like to ask Leo?
I have a question from Brian on Facebook. He wants to know, is there any difference between political Islam and social democracy like the fascist style government?
Is there a difference, or is there there's many similarities?
Is there any difference?
Yeah, I mean, the difference is that the fascist societies are not much different than the socialist or Marxist societies, and that they're trying to build a new order, a new social order of totalitarian control. The only difference is that under Islam, we have a very similar human thirst for power, only it is executed through an ostensibly religious system. You can debate whether they really are all that religious or if they just want the control. The mullahs like we see in Iran, are they really all that on fire for God, or do they just want to control people and be in power? I'm not here to judge that. I personally believe that they do very seriously believe in this false religion, but it is very much like fascist, socialistic, Marxist systems. This is just another system to keep humanity under the control of the elites. And what I actually see happening is a merger of Marxist socialism on the political side and Islam, or possibly Chrislam, as a new global religion that will be used to corral the religious people of the world into this new social global order, which we know leads to will have a devastating impact on humanity, because it will just be a crushing of all freedom. And where it will lead, it could be to biblical magnitudes, something very, apocalyptic in the end. And that is all spelled out for us in the Bible.
Yes, yeah, Leo, and you recently posted an article on your site, and that again, folks, is leohohmann.com. Look for the article, "Are Elites Setting the Stage for a Global Crackdown on Biblical Christianity?" Now, I've been saying this for a long, long time. All of these things that we talk about on this program and with other authors, it's all aimed at the same thing. Ultimately, it all comes down to this: the attempted destruction of the true church of Jesus Christ. Christianity is the target. If we can remove Christianity, then the globalists, the elitists, think that they'll have complete control. Boy, are they in for a shock. Anyway.
You are absolutely right, Mike. Christianity is the last man standing. It's the last fortress that stands in the way of this new global order. And I think it was really revealing last week when we had the mass slaughter of 359 Christians in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
And the global media, our national media here in America, could barely give it about a day and a half of begrudging coverage. And just the tone of the coverage was so completely different than what we saw just a month earlier when 50 Muslims were killed at two mosques in New Zealand. To have these two events so close together, I think really crystallized what you and I and others have been feeling for some years, but I hope it's going to wake up the masses of American Christians to see that we need to prepare for persecution. We're already being persecuted. We're already under what we call soft persecution. You know, we don't get certain jobs. We get passed over for promotions. We get mocked and berated on social media. That's what you would call soft persecution. But if we read the tea leaves on how the globalists and the secularists and the Islamists, who are all on the same page as far as where we need to go in the future, if we look at how they're treating Christians and how they won't even call the Sri Lankan victims Christians. They had to invent a new term, Easter worshipers.
Yes.
That was very telling, because when all of these other groups get victimized, whether it's Muslims, what did they say when Barack Obama and Hillary and all the rest take to social media after an event like that? They say, we mourn with the families and we stand with the Muslim community. When the nightclub in Florida, Orlando, Florida, was attacked by an Islamic jihadist a couple years ago, what did they say? They didn't say, we stand with nightclub dancers. They were very specific. They said, we stand with the LGBT community. But when Christians are attacked in a way that was 9.5 times larger than the New Zealand attack, 359 dead compared to 50 dead, all they could say is, you're in our thoughts and prayers, you Easter worshipers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They could not clearly identify the victims as Christians.
Yes. Yeah. There is a deep and very pervasive deception that has descended upon America. And it's just alarming to me as someone who has eyes to see, ears to hear, because of the Holy Spirit that has allowed me those abilities. It just defies reason and logic that people don't see this, Leo. It's right out, plain sight, and yet people act like, well, what are you so hysterical about, Mike? What's the problem?
They're like zombies, aren't they?
They are like zombies. That's absolutely right.
We were warned about this from Jesus in Matthew 24. He said that the deception would be so strong in the last days, that if possible, even the elect would be deluded.
Yes, yeah. And so people that encourage others to wake up and then to take action. And I'm not talking about violence, folks. I'm talking about being an activist, being out talking to people, making your case, and you're going to come up against somebody that's going to disagree with you. So you better be prepared to answer those objections. You can't sit back in our homes. We can't stay in our holy huddles on Sundays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, Fridays, whatever day you happen to meet with your brothers and sisters. We can't sit back and expect that, well, it's all going to work out in the end. No, what's going to work out in the end is Christianity is going to be attacked increasingly, and it's going to be the violence is going to be ratcheted up. And our government, as Leo's already pointed out, as I'm pointing out too, our government is not going to do a thing about it. They're going to redefine it. They're going to deceive you and make you lose focus and look at other places, and it's going to continue, folks. We need to push back and push back hard. Kathy, are there any other questions from social media?
No, I'm not seeing any out there.
Anybody in the huddle? Jenny, you got anything you want to ask?
Not at this time. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Anybody else in the huddle have a question for Leo? Okay. Well, here's where I want to go next, Leo. This is frustrating to me, but again, it all goes back to the money. Follow the money.
Hmm.
You mentioned 9 private agencies serve as fronts really for the U.S. government in the legal immigration program. The thing that stands out about these 9, and I'm just going to read them, folks. You got to get the book. Get Leo's book, Stealth Invasion. Encourage you to do that. You can get it on his site. Here are the 9 agencies at the time of the writing of that Leo wrote and released the book. And tell me what sticks out after I get done giving you the
But
organizational
yeah,
names.
just one quick comment, Mike. You can see on
Yes.
on Amazon, my book takes 1 to 3 months, it says, to ship. That's because they're all out of books. And I'm not sure at this point they're going to be able to get any more. I have about 100 books in my possession, and that may be the last 100 books available on this first printing. And so they really need to go to my website, leohoman.com, to order the book.
Yeah. Yep. Go to leohoman.com. There is a, there you go. Order your copy of Stealth Invasion on the left there. You can go there and order your copy, and Leo will get that out to you. There you go. So here are the 9 organizations, folks. What do they have in common? U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, Episcopal Mitigation Ministries, World Relief Corps, which is an arm of the National Association of Evangelicals, Church World Services, part of the World Council of Churches, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, the Ethiopian Community Development Council, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. That's a head scratcher right there, but I'll come back to that. The International Rescue Committee. What do most of those organizations have in common? What's the answer, brothers and sisters? They're religious organizations. And most of those religious organizations claim Jesus Christ as the Son of God and the Savior of the world. And yet, for money, they are bringing in, and I read it someplace, Leo, you please correct me. The figure is probably different now. Here it is. The federal government pays these 9 primary contractors per head, in other words, per individual that they resettle, $2,025 a piece. So you can do the math. It adds up to millions of dollars a year for these organizations. That's a travesty, Leo.
Yes, and it's actually more than last I checked. It was up to about 2,500, 2,600 per head per refugee, and it may be even more than that now. But it even goes beyond that, Mike, because that's just the per head fee that they get paid, and they keep roundly about half of it. But they also get eligible for numerous, countless grant programs to service the refugees once they resettle them. They teach the refugees everything from, how to drive a car to how to shop at a U.S. grocery store, because these people are coming in, talk about no job skills. They don't even have basic living skills. You're talking someone from a broken country like Somalia that's been in civil war on and off for 35 years.
Yes.
They don't even have running water in a lot of these places. So they have to teach them everything from how to speak basic English. I'm talking very basic English, to how to use a public bathroom or a store. Excuse me. But so it's very lucrative as far as the grant programs that are available. But perhaps the biggest travesty to me, Mike, is that in return for getting this government money, these so-called religious organizations, from the Catholic bishops on down to the Lutherans and the Episcopalians and the evangelicals, they, in return for this exclusive right to resettle the refugees, they give up. They sign a contract with the U.S. State Department, and I have copies of it in writing. They sign a contract in which they agree not to share the gospel with the refugees.
Wow.
Yes, they call it proselytizing in the State Department contracts.
I call it the Judas clause.
Amen.
Wow.
And so not only are I would call this definitely blood money. Yes, Judas clause, whatever you want to call it, because in return for the dirty deed, they're getting their 30 pieces of silver, and they're closing the door to the message of Jesus Christ for these Muslim refugees, who in many cases are hungry for the truth. And if you could share the gospel with them as soon as they get here, before they get entrenched in a mosque, we could do wonderfully good things as Christians and prevent these people from a life of misery in Islam and under the mosque. But we're not doing that because these 9 vologs, 6 of which are religious affiliated organizations, have agreed not to proselytize.
Yes. Now there's one religious demographic that need not apply, because they're going to get turned down, turned away. And of course, I'm talking about Middle Eastern and African Christians. They're told don't even bother, because the number that actually get through, that are approved and come in as legal immigrants, is slim and next to none. Is that accurate, Leo?
It depends on the country. If you're talking about Syria under the Obama administration, which the floodgates were wide open for about 6 years on Syrian refugee resettlement under Obama, and Syria has a very large Christian minority. About 10% of the country is Christian. Less than 1% of the refugees that were sent to the West from Syria were Christian. And so some other countries, like Iraq, I believe it was about 30% were Christian, 70% were Muslim. So it depends on the country as far as the percentage, but in most cases, we're seeing a majority Muslim, especially under Obama. Now that has shifted some under President Trump. We're taking much lower numbers in general. Total numbers are way down, and the percentage of Christians is up. And so kudos to President Trump for that. That's good news. The bad news is that the Trump administration has done nothing to reform this program in general. The fact that the UN does the initial vetting of the refugees and selection, the fact that local communities here in the United States have no say over whether they get to accept refugees or not, cities and states. These are things that are fundamentally flawed with the refugee legislation that was written in 1980, signed by President Carter. We need to reform this law. There's been, like I said, nobody in Congress who wants to take this on. The president hasn't forced it, perhaps for that reason. Maybe he knows he cannot get backing from Congress. And so the problem here is that while the numbers are way down under Trump, because he can control the overall numbers. Remember what I said at the outset. He can control the overall numbers and the countries that they come from, but not necessarily picking the religion of the people who come here. And so he's done a good job with that. But the problem, because there's been no reform of the law, as soon as we get a new president, especially if he's Democrat, but even if he's a Republican, more than likely a globalist Republican, like a Jeb Bush or somebody, we will see the numbers go right back to where they were under President Obama, and perhaps even higher, to make up for lost time.
Yes, yes, and we don't have time to go down this road, but I think one of the solutions here, Leo, is that we need to get governors in place that are going to exert state rights and state sovereignty and tell the federal government to go pound sand, especially on this issue, a lot of others, especially on this issue. You're not going to resettle them in our state. That's not happening, and you can take that someplace else. Now, before we run out of time, and I'll come back to you in just a second. Before we run out of time, I want to remind you tonight at 8 o'clock, David Heavener Live is on. So you can see that. I know on Facebook, go to davidheavener.tv. I know he's on Roku, on YouTube, all of that. David Heavener Live tonight at 8 o'clock. Also, again, Coach Dave Live, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Join the huddle. And also, David Arthur, I Belong Amen Ministries, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m., folks. And I thank you, Jared. You're a whiz at that keyboard running through these things. All of these shows would benefit you. Fantastic information and encouragement. All these guys are in the culture fight, folks. And I don't want to forget Ray Moore, Tuesdays at 11 a.m., Ray Moore Live. Fantastic information on Christian education, especially homeschooling, subject of that nature. Mike, we have just 2 minutes left, and I apologize. Is there anything you'd like to bring in? If you'd like to support our work, folks, you'd like to support Dr. Mike Live, everything that goes on behind the scenes, you can go to drmikelive.com, drmikelive.com. Up at the top, there's a donate button, and Mike, I'll give you some time to share what you would like.
Can you hear me?
I can.
I'm so excited, Dr. Mike, to be working with you to put together a budget. You've been so generous throughout your ministry career to work as a pastor and as I understand it, volunteer your time, and what a blessing that's been to your church. And as you move toward retirement here in a year or so, you want to go into full-time ministry, thank God. And so I'm working with you on putting together a budget. In future shows, we'll be talking about what that budget amount is, and we'll be asking your viewers and your listeners to your podcast and the people who frequent your website to get the excellent material that you publish so frequently to pray for you, pray for your budget, pray for Kathy and your team. And I couldn't be more excited about helping you put beneath yourself a support foundation that you've never needed before because of how God has provided for you. But as we move through this transition over the next year or two, it's going to be very exciting. So want to ask people to pray for your ministry, Soaring Eagle Radio, Dr. Mike Live, so many other, your book, which I'm reading, Mike, it's excellent. Make the Pulpit Great Again. I'm about a third of the way through. God bless you for all you do.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I'm excited to be working with you, and I appreciate what you're doing to help. Because, folks, listen, I'm not good at this. I'm not good at asking for support or donations because I've never had to do it. The Lord's always blessed. But Kathy and we're going to retire here in the next few months, and we're looking for God's people to support us and encourage us financially and with prayers as we build this team. So thank you, Mike, for introducing that to our viewers. Amen. Leo, there's so much more that we need to talk about. Let's just schedule something and come back and do this again, and we'll take up where we left off, because we didn't really even get out of chapter 1 of your book. Stealth Invasions, the book, folks. You got to get it, but you got to get it through Leo. So go to leohohmann.com, order the book from his website. He's got about 150 copies, he said, left. Leo, can I put you on the spot and say if they'll order these books off of your site, you'll autograph them for them?
Oh, absolutely. I autograph every book that's ordered through my site.
There you go, folks. How are you going to beat that? Stealth Invasion. Let's do something about it for Christ, shall we? Remember, Islam, folks, is Antichrist. It is the spirit of Antichrist. I can't say that any plainer. Renewing our minds, folks, is not an option. Get in the game. God bless you. See you next week.